Look, so this is the Electoral Commission complaints page, right? And they're not really that old. They're relatively new. I don't even know if they're that much older. They must be only around as old as Facebook and YouTube anyway, right? So all the law for elections, I think they've only come around on the scene since YouTube and Facebook have been around. So all the stuff that's been put together on those teams really are only familiar with elections existing at the same time social media has existed. But I want to show you this menu here. I'm just actually going to look when the Electoral Commission was created. Right, so 2000. So the Electoral Commission, as we know it, the establishment of it, and it being created as a body with staff, was only in the year 2000. And then it was around 5 years after when YouTube sort of appeared and Facebook, right? So when the Electoral Commission was created, political parties only really had their websites and they only used adverts within England, right? And they didn't have these sort of... There were forums, there were internet forums, but it's not like everyone was on it together in one thing. It was like... You might have like a tennis group that had like a forum, right? But it was mainly, but if you've got a tennis group who's got a forum, it would mainly be people in England, right? I went on some forums with Americans, but they were like in niche subjects, like interests, hobby interests, right? If you had a forum for the Liberal Democrat Party, right, then it would all be English people because only English people can vote for the Liberal Democrat Party, right? So why would any Americans be on there, right? I mean, if you've got an English political party called the Conservative Party, and to be a member of it, you've got to be English, and then they talk about English policy, why would loads of Americans sign up to it and join it if it was like a isolated forum, right? You know, like Labour Party membership, Labour Party vote for their leader, right? You wouldn't go on there. It's not like it was like an international fishing forum when people from all over the world talked about fishing, right? Now, this is where I think it started to go wrong. They were created in 2000 and people were going on forums around that time. But when it comes to British politics, you can't be a member of a British... you need to be able to vote in England, right? So what interest would you have in voting in England? Maybe there might have been some forums with like-minded people in politics across the world, but you wouldn't have said it was like the British Conservative Party, because then if Americans joined it, it would just be ridiculous, right? So it wasn't actually until around 2005 and 6 when these really big platforms started to gather everyone in the world onto them, right, all together, and then people could just flick through channels, and there was a lot of encouraged blending between different nationalities and countries, right? But elections should have continued to go by English law. Now, if you read that debate in the House of Lords debate on election propaganda, it sets out all of the concerns, and it says that there are even more concerns. It says that there's actually a lot more to go into on it, and there are a lot more concerns and a lot more problems, and they're just setting out the initial basic ideas and just briefing on it, basically. They haven't even gone into it anywhere near as technically as complicated as you need to go into it, right? And that is on the controverted election rule to do with... It's to do with mainly the influence of other countries on elections in the UK, and that includes all of their citizens, because they're not registered to vote in England, and they don't vote in England, right? And then the jurisdiction, there are different jurisdictions. So if you've got people, it's not just transmissions coming from abroad, saying, it doesn't really matter if it's a radio transmission coming from abroad or a person typing in a comment. It's still coming from abroad, and that's the main point. Effectively, any US citizens who type comments in, which show up on campaign pages of candidates in England, it's no different from having any advertisements coming from abroad, right? It's jurisdiction, and also, it's just ridiculous to think, if you have a court trial in England, and then you've got all these adverts which might have been hosted in America, but they've been transmitted to England, and then if you have to investigate it, all of the equipment's in America, and the staff are in America. How do you call them in as witnesses if there's something wrong with the advertisement, and the way it's been stored and hosted and broadcast? It's just common sense. But it makes the law, right? It says that, and there's a few different wording of it in different acts, right? It says any transmissions coming from overseas, so that would include Bluetooth, surely, because it's wireless. Bluetooth's wireless, right? And the internet hubs are wireless, right? But it also says in one of the acts, it clearly states equipment and devices overseas, right? They're not allowed to make use of them yet. From YouTube and Facebook starting out, they did. And the BBC encouraged people to go on Facebook, right? They got a free advertisement on the BBC for Facebook. And then there's the fact that private businesses and companies cannot show the candidate to the public, right? And make them more popular. And that's what Nigel Farage did using Talking Pints. Reform UK didn't pay for the studio, the setting on that programme, and it was gifted as a treat on Freeview and online, and it dramatically increased his popularity, and he did get a seat. Now, the nearer it is to his election, and the nearer it is to the actual election and the voting, then the easier it is to prove that it influenced it, right? The further away it is, the harder it is to prove, and that's the basis of that Hexham petition, right? To do with, holding parties that influence people as well, right? So, but those Talking Pints programmes, they're still up. But anyway, the Electoral Commission, I just don't know what they're playing at. I don't think that their staff are... They're on a side. They're saying that they're impartial, but they're not. They're all like Starmer soldiers. They're all government soldiers. It's like the government can do no wrong, right? It's like it's like the government can do no wrong, but it has done wrong because Nick Clegg cheated in the Sheffield Hallam election, and he had a radio show, right? And he was getting popularity in the area that he was standing in and around Sheffield from that radio show. No one knows election law hardly. I've asked barristers about this. So at that time, if you lived in the Sheffield and Hallam area, you'd have had to have been doing a university degree course in politics, and I don't even know if they teach you the election law of those acts. So very few people would have had the books, legislation and law, or got them out of the cupboard and looked at them, right? And Nick Clegg, you would have needed £5,000 to challenge him, or however much it was at that time, which, people would rather go play pool or whatever. I used to go Sheffield... I think I did go to that Sheffield Hallam area. There's a lot of students in that area. People aren't going to spend £5,000 challenging Nick Clegg. They want to go play pool or whatever, or go buy a pizza, right? This is the thing. Clegg got away with it, but Clegg ended up as the Deputy Prime Minister of England, right? When he's already... his election could have been challenged. It was challengeable, right? He was cheating, and it was challengeable, right? When no one challenged it. So he gets to be Deputy Prime Minister of England, right? He's, I'm a Lib Dem, right? We're all for fairness. Well, Jamie Stone's a Lib Dem, but he's running an e-petitions committee that he's got a policy which is obstructive to standing orders, right? And it's perverting the course of justice. These Lib Dems aren't actually really any better off than Conservatives or the Labour or even the Green Party, I don't think. So Clegg ends up, being Deputy Prime Minister with Cameron, and they, admittedly, Clegg Clegg said to Mark Zuckerberg in an interview that, all this tech's moving so quickly the government can't keep up with it. No, he was Deputy Prime Minister. They knew exactly what was going on. They said, hey, this is great, let's just let them do it. And, we won't bother changing the laws, and we'll actually go on these platforms illegally, and it'll give us a help and benefit, right? Just like his illegal radio show was helping him, benefiting him, right? And then Clegg ends up being in charge of Facebook global president, so he's like an implant. Clegg is part of this. Clegg is a cog in this machine. Clegg is a kingpin in the machine. Clegg is actively breaking the law himself, right, in Sheffield Hallam. Then he becomes Deputy Prime Minister of England, and then he's like, hey, great, all this great new social media and platforms kicking off. We love all this, right? Doesn't change the law, but you can't really change the law anyway, because there's a reason why that law exists, right? To have fair elections in England, right? And then he lands a job leading the president of Facebook, right? With Zuckerberg, who's leading a revolution against the world, because actually, all along, all of this is part of Tony Blair's plan for digital ID cards, which we know that the mobile phone is. If the mobile phone becomes any flatter, it is a digital ID card. And then when the mother say, oh yeah, by the way, my mobile phone is a digital ID card. Didn't you know that? Oh, sorry, we've got to tell you, right? We'd already given you and implanted it, in the year 2000, after we got rid of Nokia bricks, in fact, Nokia brick is a transmission, so transmissions from overseas. Oh, this is Nokia brick. It's soon going to be a digital ID card, right? We were planning it, right? It's all planned, right? But we'll sneak it in stage by stage, right? So you don't realise what's going on, right? We've already got everyone with their own digital ID card. Now we just got to be able to convince them it's a digital ID card, right? After we deny it. And all the rest of it. So they're fighting. Tony Blair's has made they're fighting a revolution. So these are all. There is no Lib Dem. There is no Conservative. There is no Labour. There is only like Clegg, Sunak, Cameron, Starmer, Blair. They're all like, hey, let's have a revolution of technology against the world and the citizens and take them over, right? And, we'll just pretend we're all in different parties and that, we're disagreeing with each other. When actually, Nick Clegg broke the law. He's a criminal, right? Tony Blair, let's have like a House of Lords Attorney General when you can't do that, but I'll do it anyway, and then we can order the Lords around, I'll command Lords to go do my bidding, right? And then the public can't even telephone the Attorney General because he's not in the House of Lords. You can't ring up. Yeah, I can leave a telephone message in the House of Commons, but I can't do it to the House of Lords, right? Unless you email them, they have to reply to you. It's all so. This Electoral Commission, they're like the Solicitor Regulation Authority. I found that this Solicitor Regulation Authority actually are funded by all the solicitors, right? All the solicitors actually fund it. Apparently, the government don't fund it. It's not a non-departmental government thing. It's just they regulate solicitors. It's like solicitors are regulating themselves, really. That's what the guy reckoned to me who runs it, right? All of these agencies that we think are like government complaints departments to deal with complaints, they're all actually now being there to make sure that complaints don't get acted on, right? But they all believe that they're there impartially, right? Like Ofcom, and Lord Allen of Hallam was also in charge of Facebook before Nick Clegg, right? And now he's in charge of Ofcom with Byron Grade on the board. Now all these independent places have been given these policies which effectively don't let them do anything, right? But they're meant to have these powers like they can take videos down. They're not using them, right? They're all being turned into like a corporate business, private style body with all these heavy restrictions on policies of what they can and can't do, which completely go against the law, right? So you can't even use the law by the time they put their policy. And they're actually delegating all powers from government to these agencies who actually either the staff are completely and totally like Zik Heil sold out on the institution, the government, but in a way like the government can't do any wrong, right? But yet they're meant to be there to make sure that, if rules are complied with. It's just ridiculous. It is the taking of the enterprise. It is the hijacking of the government. and they're splitting up and sectioning of it off to private corporate business, which is what they wanted to do with Amazon and Bezos anyway, with all the medical side of it, right? And the petitions committee are the same now. Like, it's meant to be the House of Commons, the judicial function of the House of Commons between your MP, right? And now it's like some team who runs a policy which completely goes against standing orders, so you can't even use the standing orders, right? And they're blocking and denying everything on these policy excuses, but they're not even applying the policy properly to what it said when they were created. Anyway, it says you can disagree with the government, right? Or criticise the government, and they're not letting us. So they've got all these. It's like the staff of the enterprise, right? You know, like when they steal it, and what they've done is they've got all these staff in place, and they're all completely brainwashed. I mean, they're either completely, totally thick, right, or they're just like absolutely full on in on it, and I can't believe how they don't know that, you know, that they're doing it wrong, because I'm a good little boy following this good little policy, right? You know, just a minute, yeah, your policy cannot possibly be right or exist. It's obstructing the powers which are given for the purpose which they're given for, right? You know, standing orders will call for documents, persons and people so they can understand petitions, right? Right. Do not speak to any people about their petitions, right, to make sure that you understand it, right? Just reject them all and then make them try again, right? And just keep doing that, right? So effectively block them, right? This is it. There's I don't know where these people come from. Maybe they're from Sheffield Hallam, you know? Maybe they're from Sheffield Hallam. It's like it is a fascist regime. It's suppressing all opposition, and apparently they're not wrong, but they are wrong, right? And then they're so wrong that when you prove that they're so wrong, they're absolutely screwed, right? The whole department has been completely and utterly uncorrupt, right, since it started. Now, this is just their complaint form, right? Make a complaint about them. So you put your name in, address, email, telephone number, right? Your postcode, select your region of the country. And then here, what is your complaint about? So this is a classic example of what they're doing to us, right? You can have one option, right? What is your complaint about? And I don't know why this form is now closing. Well, this form should just change to a different selection every time I press it, right? But stay on the screen. I think that because I'm using screen record, it's misbehaving, right? Right, so I'll press like the top one, right? So the top option is selected now. You can see there's a little black dot in the top right corner. We have not been impartial in our work. So you can choose that, right? Or you can choose the next one down, which is we did not deal with something or did not deal with something quickly enough, right? And the next option is we did not follow the correct procedures. We have shown unfairness, discrimination, or discourtesy. Well, this is absolutely ridiculous, right? I really don't know what they're teaching them in university. I don't know what they're teaching them in school or college. But to anyone, right, if you have not been impartial in your work, right, then that is what it says if we have shown unfairness, discrimination, or discourtesy. If you discriminate against someone or be unfair, that is actually being impartial, right? That is actually what being impartial is. What is the entire basis of being impartial is that you favour one side over another, right? So, well, that's discriminatory now. You might say, well, discriminatory has to be like gender, sex, or whatever. But sex is male or female, one side or the other side, right? Religion is one religion or the other, right? Choosing one religion or another. That's being impartial. That's what it actually is. But just not naming the particular thing that you've been impartial over, but it's the act of impartiality, choosing one over, favouring one over another unfairly. Well, that's what happens when you get done for sexual discrimination, is favouring one sex over another, right? So some of these, has the person who has designed this form and concocted these options, are they thick, right? Are they completely and purely, utterly thick, right? Or is this strategic, right? Is this a fascist strategic takeover move of this country, right? We did not follow the correct procedures, right? Well, if they're not abiding with the law is what procedures though, right? You can say we did not comply with the law, right? We did not follow the Representation of the People Act. We did not issue a takedown notice, right? When you were asked to issue a takedown notice when something was illegal, right? But then, but do they mean the procedures of their policy, which is different to the law? Now, let's use the e-petitions team as an example, right? The e-petitions team are all pretending they're all goody little two-shoes, right? And going, oh yeah, we're applying the policy. They're not applying the policy. The creation of it, right, says that you're allowed to disagree with the government in a petition, right? And you're allowed to criticise the government, right? Now, whenever we criticise the government, right, which it says we're allowed to do, they say, oh, you're accusing someone of wrongdoing. Well, no, I'm criticising the government. That is what criticism is, right? So already there's a cognitive problem, or there is some serious issue with the staff, right? And the standing orders say that they've got to use powers in order to understand the petition, right? But the policy says that do not contact anyone or speak to them, right? So the policy is telling them not to do what the law says, right? So if he says we did not follow the correct procedure here, I'll highlight that one. We did not. So highlight. I've put the little dot selection on. We did not follow the proper procedures. But what is that? If it was the petitions committee, I want to use the petitions committee for an example, right? So standing orders, the procedures are to call for documents, papers, or people to understand the petition, right? Obviously, before you make a determination on it, right? But what they're doing is, the policy says, do not contact anyone before you make a determination. So, which procedure didn't they follow? The standing orders procedures, or the policy procedures? Or actually in the documents that found their team and tell them, like, you know, what we are and aren't allowed to do, like HC Paper 235, right? Or the law of the Observation of Due Process of Law Act, you didn't follow those procedures, which say that the entire community has a right to assemble and come together and put their hands to a petition before they send it into Parliament, right? Is that a procedure they didn't follow? So, which procedure, right? They've got procedures and policies which are actually telling them not to do certain things which are required to do in the law, right? So what this is, it's splitting one thing, which is an actual intelligible thing, into multiple things, which actually, some of them actually just mean they're the exact same thing, right? But stated in completely different words, right? So basically, we have not been impartial in our work, right? Effectively, it's so similar to the we have shown unfairness or discrimination, right? We found unfairness or the discrimination part in it, right? If it said unfairness or discourtesy, but it says discrimination, and discrimination is the same as being impartial, right? In my opinion, very similar. So similar that it would be more appropriate to include discrimination or impartiality in the top one, not in the unfairness and discourtesy, right? Now, what they're doing is they're being allowed in a very short sentence, like 10 words, to say things which are effectively aren't that much different, right? But they're all saying it in different words. And when I submit an e-petition, right, they say, oh, we don't understand it. And they're telling me to write it in different words, right? They want me to write it in words that they want me to write it in, not how I want to say it, but it means the exact same thing, right? It means the same thing, right? Like, we do not think that the e-petitions team is following the policy. Well, what do you want us to do about it? Well, we would take a look at it, right? Oh, I would like the e-petitions team to look at the policy, right? Because I don't think they've been following it properly, right? Or say, oh, the e-petitions team have not been following the policy properly in these clauses. Well, what do you want us to do about it? Well, what do you think I want you to do about it? It's not to say how we want you to say it, right? But yeah, they're allowed to say these things as creatively as they want in all these different things, right? But it's the same freaking thing, right? But when we use creativity to say the same thing in different words, they say, oh, you can't do that. You're not allowed. We're not allowing you. You just say how we want you to say it. You can't say we have not been impartial to our work. You've got to say we have not shown unfairness, or we have shown unfairness, discrimination, or courtesy, right? Whereas, you can't say that. You've got to say impartiality, right? This is the thing. We made mistakes when carrying out our work. We did not meet the standard of service. I mean, are they serious about this? We made mistakes when carrying out our work, right? So if you make mistakes when you're carrying out the work, then you clearly did not meet the standard of service, did you? Now at the bottom it says we did not meet our standards of service. But if you didn't meet the standards of service, right, then clearly you made mistakes. Because when you don't meet the standards, then you're clearly not doing something right. Or if it was poor or shabby. Well, this is the thing with e-petitions, right? On an e-petition, they're trying to make out that we're not meeting some sort of standard, but they didn't actually say what that standard is, right? They just don't think that we said it how it wasn't good enough, right? You can't have whether it's good enough or not. When you're making a legal claim, either you enter it or you don't, right? They've put you, we made mistakes, so if they say, oh, this is wrong, or that's wrong, surely that, does that mean that it wasn't up to the standards then? We did not follow the correct procedures. So there's no doubt that if they did not follow the correct procedures, that would mean that they also did not meet the standards of service. But if they made mistakes when carrying out their work, then that also would mean that they did not meet the standard of service as well, right? We did not follow the correct procedures. We did not deal with something or did not deal with something quickly enough. So why would they concentrate on the speed, right? They did not deal with something or they did not deal with it quickly enough. Well, if you don't deal with something quickly enough, then surely it did not meet the standard of service, because you'd have thought the standard of service would mean that they would deal with it efficiently and quickly, right? So whoever writes these, right, whoever puts these options, so there's something wrong with them, right? And what they're doing now is they're only letting you choose. They're saying, oh, you've got a complaint. Well, which complaint is it? Well, we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 6 different complaints that you're allowed to have here, right? You can choose one of the complaints. Like, we'll tell you what your complaint is, okay? And then we'll see if you can have it or not. They're trying to make it so they decide what our complaint is, or try to define our complaint. But it might be, and they're only letting you choose one of these options, right? When it actually might be all of them. Now, with the e-petitions committee, right, they are lying, right? They aren't applying the policy properly or interpreting it properly. The policy is in contradiction to the law, so they're not following the law, right? So, therefore, their standard of service is terrible, and they're not dealing with it. So, which of these would it be? Well, it's all of them. And also they're actually not they're allowing some people to run petitions like Michael Westwood that criticises Labour and the Labour election when they went back on promises that they promised, so they represented falsely to people, right? And then when someone else criticises Labour or someone, they don't allow it, right? So they're not being they're not being impartial on people submitting petitions when they're applying the policy, right? So they haven't been impartial in their work. Then they're not dealing with things, or they're not dealing with it quickly enough, because they're also taking ages to check these petitions. They're not following the correct procedures. The procedures are actually in conflict with each other. It's actually impossible to follow procedures, because to follow the standing orders and use it is to go against the policy, and to use the policy is to obstruct standing orders, right? This is just using the petitions committee as an example, right? They've shown unfairness, discrimination, or courtesy. Well, they are discriminating against us because they are saying that, we're not allowed to criticise the government, when it says that we can criticise the government, and not only that, we can disagree with the government, right? So that they're being unfair and discriminatory, and they're making mistakes because they're not actually we don't know what you're saying, so they're then up to the standard. They say, we don't understand what this petition means. So if they don't understand what the petition means, but 20 people have signed it who clearly did understand it, then they're the ones who aren't up to the standards. So, and when we made mistakes when carrying out our work, well, they're always making mistakes on when they're checking petitions. So it's all of these, right? So it's every single one of these. And in fact, this list is just, this is a pointless list, right? Because most of these overlap. And then here, you can actually put something in writing. You can actually write your own words. But those days are, when you're getting on YouTube and Facebook now, you can't put words in many of the complaints forms. They don't let you write anything, and you can only have what they say, right, in a lot of the forms. And it's getting like that more and more. It's like I call it a McMenu, right? It's like a McMenu complaints. And that's the way they've been trying to take the e-petitions complaints that way as well. So there's less, you can put less in there. And the policy is trying to make out that, you can only have these certain things, these certain requests on to changing laws. When it's like, no, that's not what petitioning is there for, right? And it says that, e-petitions exist because it's possible, and it's meant to be for the same purpose as paper petitions, right? But they're disallowing them. So what I'm saying is the Electoral Commission, they're operating by the same staff sort of directives and attitude and philosophies as the e-petitions team are now, and they've got this similar kind of structure in place. And there's something very wrong with it, because it's not actually doing what it's meant to do. I don't think that they want there to be many complaint systems. Also, the Ombudsman, the Ombudsman is actually also another one that's a lot more difficult to use and get a complaint going with. And there's a lot of they need certain things from you to be able to act. Whereas when you petition Parliament, they were the ones who commanded everything. Send for the document, send for the people, right? You write the complaint. You're not allowed to attach any evidence to the petition, right? You're not allowed to attach any evidence to the petition, and you cannot annex anything to it, right? They're the ones who call for everything. But now with the Ombudsman, it's like, if you don't annex anything to it, if you don't include all these things, then they won't act, or they can't act, right? But it's meant to take over from the petition to Parliament, and that's why you get your MP to sign. So it's actually, the original petition process was actually very simple and straightforward, and they commanded many powers. Right now, it's like, they've changed it. Maybe they thought, maybe they should attach things, right? But now it's not like, you can attach things, it will help us out. It's like they won't actually do anything unless you attach anything, right? So I'm not happy with these departments and the type of staff they're getting. looking at some of these staff, you can't, get to meet these people. It's bad enough when there's all these campaign groups like, Big Brother Watch and, Resistance GB and, Gareth Icke and Neil Oliver and Russell Brand and so forth. And they're all going in each other's programmes and they're all saying all these things. But, we need to, can anyone get, speak to Sean Harris, or Gareth Price, from Senedd, any of these clerks or these staff, or these Electoral Commission people. I can't actually get to the Electoral Commission now. I would have been able to, but I'm not driving, right? So, I would have been able to go there. Maybe like the news, the press office, you can, when they come out of them, and maybe you can go in there and have a meeting with them. And maybe they still won't agree with you in person, right? But you get an idea of what the real problem is if it's a particular person, one person or another person, or whether it is a policy which is actually designed to be obstructive and contradictory. Or maybe it might be like, the news, even ITV News sometimes can't get to speak to, sometimes, Channel 4 News has got them in the studio and they can, speak to Rees Mogg. Other times, they're actually, following them down the street and they don't want to talk to the news, so even the news sometimes can't get a comment or statement from people, if they're following them down the pavement with the microphone trying to get a comment, out of an MP and they don't want to talk to them, or someone from the Electoral Commission, or if it's been a scandal or something. I'm not saying the news always gets a statement, and I'm not saying the news always gets someone on the programme, right? Sometimes they do, but it depends what the particular issue is, if the MP or the person has been naughty or done something wrong, then they likely don't want to talk to them, right? And that's when you get that situation. Or they might, be eager to come in the studio if they're, interviewing them about some government policy or something, and they want to speak and publicity about it. This is the thing. But we're not actually even getting the names of these other e-petition staff at the moment. I only know Sean Harris because he wrote to me, and actually I did find him when I typed his name in. But the other ones, I don't know what names to type in. And so far, maybe I haven't done a thorough search, but the 11 members of the committee are on there, right? The 11 members of the petitions committee are on there, but they're all elected MPs. But even they're not meant to make... The determination on the petition is after your own MP has chosen to sign it, and then it's received. And then if the committee don't want to act on it, they don't have to. But that's different from putting up on the website and saying, "Oh, it's rejected" or whatever. But now I guess I've been mixing petitions committee stuff in with the Electoral Commission. But it's just an example of how the policies are actually contradictory to the law. And therefore, what I'll finish off with is this. I'm quite certain that all these laws that I've complained to the Electoral Commission about, and then they've been, saying, "Oh, we can't act," I think, and this is just my guess, I'm quite certain that it's been set up very similar to how the e-petitions team has, whereby the actual standing orders of Parliament, which are effectively, the law of running it, is actually the policy is contradictory to it and obstructive to it, so that the law and the policy are in conflict. So it's actually not allowing to be done what is meant to be done, right? And I think that's probably the case with the Electoral Commission, but because they're, under this policy and they've got someone in charge and they're all, "Oh, I'm very good, I'm well behaved, I'm following the little policy," they think that they're behaving and doing a good job, but they're actually not, because the whole thing's been set up to be corrupt. And that's the argument, that's the complaint. It's institutional corruption. The e-petitions policy is institutional corruption. You can see that through, when Rees Mogg's giving oral evidence, he's saying "Oh, these people are privileged, but wouldn't it be great if we could take their privilege away? But how do we use the processes and procedures? How do we enforce the processes and procedures if we're not privileged to? We can't, right? And that's the thing with the e-petitions team checking petitions, right? Their powers given to be able to find out things you need to know to make a determination, and the policy is saying do not, under any circumstances, contact anyone, so you're more informed to make your determination, right? So it's actually institutionally corrupt. The policy perverts the course of justice and is an abuse of process, right? And I think that this is what's been happening through all these, like the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the Judicial Conduct Investigation Office, the Bar Standards, Electoral Commission, probably Boundary Commission as well, although most people don't need to get in contact with the Boundary Commission, only local councils. And this all sort of starts to pick up more and more from Tony Blair. When he's putting these attorney generals in from the House of Lords that aren't meant to be in, they're taking away people's right to, that they're breaking the judicial oath, right? All these things, breaking the judicial oath, favours for justice, and it's not. I wouldn't call it a revolution. It's just institutionally corrupt. What they're actually doing is setting clauses of law against each other so they can't work, right? So and they haven't even changed the law, but it's like it says, like the law says that you must open the red cupboard, and then the policy says do not open the red cupboard, right? So it's like we're not opening the red cupboard. Well, how can you pass me the thing from the red cupboard, which is what I'm here for, right? Well, I can't. Well, this is what now. I don't know if it's incompetence, if they're just with Tony Blair, I think he's a bit of a rebel. I think Tony Blair's a little bit like, the Sex Pistols, John Lydon's sort of version of a politician, anarchy. I think there's anarchy in it. But then Blair wanted to bring in all this digital stuff and scrap the whole government and just have this kind of like Facebook, YouTube government, which the government actually like the idea of. Well, not everyone in the government likes the idea of it. Some people don't like the idea of it. And supposedly, there's people like, well, Andrew Bridgen, but he's not an MP anymore. But what I wanted to say is like Danny Kruger, right? Danny Kruger says that we should undo a lot of these laws that they've made, these corrupt laws or whatever. Danny Kruger, but Danny Kruger's gone over to Reform, and Reform have been breaking the election laws. So, it's just kind of ridiculous. I think that, it's got to be treated, when it's institutionally corrupt, then you're looking at treason. But then Tony Blair, the first thing he did was abolish the law for treason. So I think there's some strategy from it. I don't think Tony Blair, because Gordon Brown did this Constitutional Reform Act, and he was Tony Blair's, right-hand man, wasn't he? They're both Labour, they were both working closely together. Constitutional Reform Act, we need to be able to petition the House of Lords for things to function. They're anti-constitutionalist, that's for sure. But they're just nonsensical. They're actually putting things so it does not function anymore. It can't function, or it's dysfunctional, or there's an obstruction to function. And I think that there's a lot of wishful thinking going on with these people. That we don't really want the public to be able to do this anymore, so we'll make up this stupid policy. But that's the function of it. It's like what it does. It's almost kind of like getting to this phase where you've got a car, right, or a motorbike, or even a cart or a wheelbarrow, and you're like, I don't like people, moving around in, vehicles and devices. I think we should put a stop to it. So we'll say, like, you're not allowed to use them, but that's what it's for. That's what the thing's for. It's almost kind of like, having a calculator and say, you're not allowed to do any maths with calculators, right? We don't like sums, right? But someone made the calculator to do something. So all of the laws which were made to do a certain thing, there's a lot of these policies now are like, don't use it or don't do it. But, so what's the point in having it? Oh, we just don't want you to do it anymore. We don't like it, It's like don't speak, don't use your mouth anymore. But I've got talking. It's like they say they've got freedom of speech, but then like, by the time they've finished implementing all these laws, there's nothing you can hardly say or do. It's like, well, instead, choose these. Don't speak to anyone. Just choose one of these, right? Instead of like being creative and saying whatever words you want, choose one of these. But this is like the whole Tim Cook version of reality. Apple simplify everything, but it's not simplifying it at all.